Welcome back. This GLOBSEC 2022 is already in full swing with many sessions taking place, not just in this room, but obviously parallel as well. We have a very interesting one coming up here with the foreign ministers of Austria, Slovakia, and virtually Ukraine in just a moment. But before we kick off this very pertinent session titled War in Ukraine, Europe's Destiny at Stakes, ? First up, I'm delighted for an input, if you will, leading up to the then subsequent conversation, a keynote given by the Secretary for Relations with States of the Holy See. And he's here with us, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Paul Gallagher.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thankful for the invitation to the GLOBSEC Forum, I am pleased to share with you a reflection on the meaning of solidarity and the wave of solidarity we are observing in Europe in response to the war in Ukraine, particularly in its neighboring countries since the 24th of February. My thoughts are partly inspired by my recent journey to Ukraine, which allowed me to feel the suffering of the people and touch the serious consequences of the war, especially during my encounter with internally displaced persons and visiting the places near Kyiv most affected by the conflict. I ask, what is solidarity? Although a precise definition of solidarity does not exist, most of us would agree, in experience, that it is an attitude of attachment, of belonging to others, or of having a common interest. It is the opposite of competition and is characterized instead by mutual support and fraternity. Solidarity highlights in a particular way the intrinsic social nature of the human person. Non nobis solum nati sumus, we are not born for us alone, stated Cicero, referring to Plato. Solidarity is manifested in helping and advocating for others, especially in situations of weakness and suffering. Advocating for others assumes and includes the recognition of the equality of all in dignity and rights, especially the equal status of the victim of injustice. A bond exists between solidarity and equality among men and peoples, between solidarity and peace in the world. As Pope Francis emphasized, the word solidarity is a little worn and at times poorly understood, but it refers to something more than a few sporadic acts of generosity. It presumes the creation of a new mindset which thinks in terms of community and the priority of the life of all over the appropriation of goods by a few, end of quotation. Another important aspect of solidarity is justice, recognizing the equal dignity and the equal rights of all human beings implies advocating for those rights, and not only as a duty, but also as a question of justice. Nevertheless, justice is merely a preparatory stage. As St. Paul VI said, it is the minimum measure of charity. The idea of solidarity, which begins with an acknowledgement of the equal value of the other, goes beyond justice and comes to fulfillment only when I willingly place my life at the service of the other. True solidarity, therefore, is not limited to empathy, to individual acts of support, or to the restoration of rights, but includes the willingness to share in the other's pain, to take, in a certain sense, some of their burden upon oneself. In other words, there is no true solidarity without our willingness to share the burden of suffering that evil inflicts, and in some way, without helping to pay for it. In the end, true solidarity has a price, and it can be painful. Therefore, the social doctrine of the Catholic Church considers solidarity a virtue found in a commitment to the good of one's neighbour with the readiness, in the gospel sense, to lose oneself for the sake of the other instead of exploiting him, and to serve him instead of oppressing him for one's own advantage. For Christians, solidarity is also informed by faith, as we believe that God himself showed solidarity with humanity when he sent his Son Jesus Christ to earth, where he shared the fate of fallen humanity unto death. His passion and resurrection showed us that solidarity is the only answer to the prevalence of evil, sin, and ultimately death. War in Ukraine, a call for global solidarity. We're all following the concerning and disheartening evolution of the war in Ukraine. Faced with Russia's aggression against Ukraine, Pope Francis, together with the Church and countless people in the world, suffers greatly from the many deaths, violence of all sorts, the devastation of cities and infrastructures, the separation of so many families, and the millions of displaced people and refugees. The Catholic Church is convinced that war is a scourge and is never an appropriate way to resolve problems that arise between nations. It has never been and it never will be, because it creates new and still more complicated conflicts. When it erupts, war becomes an unnecessary massacre, an adventure without return that compromises humanity's present and threatens its future. The Pope has been as forceful as he can to defend the Ukrainian people, to point out the fact that they have their freedom, that the integrity of this country has been transgressed. As he has said, we must renew our commitment to resolve the conflict through diplomatic and political dialogues, and reject the logic of war, which is always a defeat for humanity. While we lament the limitation of our human attempts to find immediate ways to end this ceaseless conflict, and experience helplessness in the face of the refusal of dialogue, we must recognize that the war in Ukraine has triggered a global wave of solidarity and support for the Ukrainian people. Close to 6 million people are being hosted primarily by European neighboring countries, which continue to provide them with necessary humanitarian aid and financial assistance. Another 8 million people are internally displaced and currently assisted by the international community, including UNHCR, ICRC, and the local church. Faith-based organizations like Caritas and the Sovereign Order of Malta are working closely with governments not only to provide material aid, but also to answer the spiritual needs of those they serve. Although the help provided in some cases may appear to be a mere drop in the vast ocean of need, the solidarity we are witnessing in this global response is an encouraging sign. As Pope Francis said, these numerous acts of charity become a blessing for our societies, at times debased by selfishness and individualism, and help to make them welcoming to all. The strength of solidarity. At first glance, solidarity as outlined above may appear as a secondary or even a partial response to the grave situation we are facing in war-torn Ukraine, since it cannot prevent and will not end the war. Even so, we have also seen that a concrete act of solidarity might involve supporting the legitimate self-defense capacity of Ukraine within the framework of international law. Indeed, solidarity in the comprehensive sense goes far beyond stopgap or short-term responses, including humanitarian aid and other creative initiatives. The global solidarity we have seen in Ukraine will deeply form for the people's history and memory. As Pope Francis noted, solidarity, understood in its most profound meaning, is a way of making history. During my recent visit to Ukraine, both the Catholic bishops and the central and local civil authorities continually confirmed how important it is for the population to feel the closeness of the international community and to receive the support they need to pursue peace and meaningful coexistence. Weapons never lead to peace, nor does the logic of nuclear deterrence. Solidarity, however, is a privileged path towards peace because it creates bonds of friendship and cooperation among peoples and states that look beyond mere economic dependence or counterbalancing security threats. It seeks unity in the common good. Furthermore, responding in solidarity to the war in Ukraine will strengthen the international institutions as they confront a crucial moment in their history. In fact, as Pope Francis emphasized in his message for the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, we are faced with a choice between two possible paths. One path leads to the consolidation of multilateralism as the expression of a renewed sense of global co-responsibility, a solidarity grounded in justice and the attainment of peace and unity within the human family, which is God's plan for our world. The other path emphasizes self-sufficiency, nationalism, protectionism, individualism, and isolation. Peace is inconceivable without solidarity. It is imperative to recognize that interdependence in itself demands the abandonment of the politics of blocs, the sacrifice of all forms of economic, military, or political imperialism, and transformation of mutual distrust into collaboration. This is precisely the act proper to solidarity among individuals and nations. 1 year ago, Pope Francis addressed the GLOBSEC Forum in a video message, emphasizing every way of acting calls for a vision, a global vision of hope like that of the biblical prophet Isaiah, who saw swords turned into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. The world can emerge better from this crisis only by proving that solidarity is the strongest answer that humanity can provide when faced with the evils of war. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for those words. I was struck in particular by what you said about sharing the burden of suffering, sharing the burden of pain. That's something that we're certainly going to be discussing in this panel right now. I'm Justin Vogt. I'm Executive Editor of Foreign Affairs. Thank you all for being here. It's a great conference in a great city. We've got a great panel, and I'd like to introduce you to the members of that panel now and welcome them, two of them, to the stage. A third will be joining us via Zoom. First, we have Mr. Ivan Korčok, who is the foreign minister of our host nation, the Slovak Republic. We also have Mr. Alexander Schallenberg, who is the Austrian Minister for European and International Affairs. And joining us via Zoom is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Mr. Dmytro Kuleba. Now, before we begin, Mr. Senek's boss, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Mr. Dmytro Kuleba, has prepared a short video address that we'd like to share with you. We thought it would be a good way to open up our discussion.
Dear participants, friends, I regret I cannot be with you in Bratislava today, but I thank the organizers for the opportunity to address you. First of all, let me express how deeply we in Ukraine are grateful to Slovakia. Slovaks have stood by us resolutely since the very first days of the invasion. We will always remember this, and I also thank my counterpart Ivan Korčok for his personal engagement and commitment. This Friday, 100 days since Russia launched its unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine. 100 days of Russian horror, destruction, murder, looting, and rape. But also 100 days of heroism, bravery, and humanity of Ukrainians. 100 days of solidarity and support of our friends and partners around the globe. Despite all odds, and with your consistent support, Ukraine still stands both feet on the ground. At a very high cost, we have won a number of important battles. The war is now raging in the south of Ukraine and in the east, where combat is especially bloody and difficult. Hundreds of thousands of brave Ukrainians are fighting the Russian army, but we need to equip them properly to outgun Russia's enormous advantage in artillery. This is why we urgently need more NATO-style heavy weapons for our military to push the Russians back, especially the 155th caliber. And I take this opportunity to call on partners to deliver additional material as soon as possible. As a foreign minister, I would prefer to talk about diplomacy, not guns. Unfortunately, Russia leaves me no such choice. Ukraine has proposed diplomatic solutions numerous times. Before the invasion and after it has already started, Russia has consistently rejected any diplomacy and prioritized war only. Today, they remain squarely focused on seeking military solutions. The only way to force Russia to return to the negotiating table is to defeat it on the battleground. It must become clear to Putin that he will not be able to reach a military solution in Ukraine. As the war drags on for its 4th month, there is a discussion in the West on what our war aims should be. First of all, I want to make clear that it is Ukraine and the people of Ukraine who will define this war's aims. We are fighting a just defensive war against invaders who came to our land to literally annihilate us, deprive us of our identity and our right to exist. Russia's genocidal intent has become apparent after massacres in Bucha, Borodyanka, Irpin, Mariupol, and many other towns and villages. This is why we fight not for political or economic purposes, but for the right of our people to live and to be Ukrainians. We will do so as long as it takes to survive and prevail. We call on our allies and partners to drop ambiguous language and set goals straight. It is true that Russia must not win and Ukraine must not lose. But why don't we set a positive and clear goal in 3 words? Ukraine must win. When we all set this goal clearly, ways to achieve it will become much clearer too. Dear friends, with the war entering a longer phase, we hear voices proposing unrealistic ways out of this war. Cede territories or make other painful concessions that, in their view, would pacify Putin. Suggestions like these are ill-advised and invite more war, not pave the way to peace. We have followed this path from 2014 to 2022. It has only brought us to a new catastrophe. Russia wants to physically destroy Ukraine and kill as many Ukrainians as possible. Given such a choice, the only way out is to force Putin into failure. Do not worry about his face. He has enough tools at his disposal to save it. His propaganda within Russia can literally direct public opinion in any direction. And he does not need real facts for this. Should he order to withdraw his forces, he will easily explain it to the Russians. They will be told that the Russian army has fulfilled all tasks of demilitarization and denazification, whatever it means for Russia, by destroying this and that quantity of Ukrainian units, vehicles, facilities, and so on. The whole idea that Putin is cornered and has no way out is a self-imposed illusion. On the contrary, Ukraine can and must win. Win peace for itself and for the entire Europe. Ukraine's victory will be our shared victory. It will ensure generations of Europeans can live in freedom, peace, and stable development. Instead of suggesting how to save Putin's face or feed him more Ukraine's territories and lives, we should all focus on ways to push Russia back. We feel the support and solidarity of our partners, and we are deeply grateful for it. These are weapons, macro-financial assistance, funds for rebuilding our infrastructure, hospitality towards our refugees, and many other signs of global support. We urge you to continue it as long as it is necessary for Ukraine to prevail. We didn't ask Putin to go all in. It was his own choice, which he must pay for. Ukraine never wanted this war, but we will be the ones to end it. Sooner rather than later, and at a lower cost, if we receive all the necessary assistance on time, Ukraine will be a verdict to Putin's regime. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a productive discussion today.
All right. Well, we'll thank him in absentia for an excellent speech and an excellent presentation. If there's one thing that that audiences like this one have gotten used to in the past few months, it is terrific messaging from the Ukrainians, and Foreign Minister Kuleba is no slouch in that department. That is your boss, I think, Deputy Foreign Minister. And as clear as his message was, some of these ideas really deserve some scrutiny, and we want to try to understand better. So I want to start our panel today by asking you a very simple question. The foreign minister said essentially, don't worry about Putin losing face. He can sell anything as a victory owing to his propaganda machine. Let me ask you this for your thoughts on this. If that's the case, why has he not done so already?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. I also would like to thank the organizers for this important panel. Let me start by saying that when we speak about future, we imagine our future. By we, I mean Europe. It looks like we imagine it differently from Russia. Last year, we spoke about green future. What we see now is that Russia is trying to drag us to the dark past. Speaking of saving someone's face, firstly, I think that on every front, be it informational, be it by informational, I mean propaganda in Russia, be it military or any other, I think that Russia has already lost. It lost its reputation, it lost its ranking #2 military in the world, it lost the trust from the civilized community. However, of course, as soon as the war is over, it will definitely discover more and more atrocities that Russian armed forces made in Ukraine. And we are talking about scorched earth. We are talking about thousands, tens of thousands killed civilians, ruined infrastructure, hospitals, roads, schools, universities. So I believe that when we speak about losing face or saving face, I think that we need to first think about saving Ukraine. And the sooner and we do it, I think it will help the entire Europe.
Fair enough.
To strengthen itself.
Fair enough. Minister Schallenberg, one of the ways in which Ukraine has asked Europe for help, Europe is it would like to join the EU. Can you explain your government's position on that question?
Does it work, actually? No. Micro?
You're coming through now, I think.
Okay. Now, absolutely. We believe that we have to send a very clear sign. Ukraine is part of the European family. Ukraine has to be clearly anchored within the European Union. The only thing is, we cannot stop at the symbolism. Just giving an etiquette won't send the right message. What we are thinking about is, and secondly, we have to be aware that the eyes of Moscow might not only lie on Ukraine. We have Moldova, we have the Southern Caucasus, and we have, for Austria, very important, and for the European Union, the Western Balkans. So our position is, let's make a big bang, so to say, and send a very clear message that these countries, these regions are part of the Western world, of the free world, and that we want to put the money where our mouth is, and not only give an etiquette, but we have to think harder, because the templates we had in the past, full accession, association agreement, or the economic area, is not sufficient. Because look at the Western Balkans. We have promised them 19 years ago in Thessaloniki to join, and by now frustration is growing. We have already surveys in some countries in the Western Balkans where it seems that Russia is more popular than the European Union. In Republika Srpska, Vladimir Putin is the most popular politician. That should ring an alarm bell in Brussels. And I think we should not repeat the same mistake now in the East. We should think twice, and that's why we proposed in the last couple of days a couple of ideas how to put, meat on the bones of talking to have Ukraine and other countries being part of our family.
Okay, but you mentioned a clear message. So in the interest of a clear message, the answer is Austria supports EU membership for Ukraine?
I believe that this should be the clear signal of the European Council, but we have to be aware that there are no fast tracks, there's no shortcut, and we should not forget about other regions, and we should think twice, because simply having this etiquette does not send the right signal.
Okay. Mr. Minister Korčok, recently the big news, well, there's always big news these days, every day there's big news, but one of the pieces of big news recently was the agreement on banning Russian oil, the embargo of Russian oil via tanker, but not via pipeline. Slovakia was granted some exemptions from the EU ban on importing Russian oil. I'd like to know, how does the Slovak government reconcile its clear and strong opposition to Russia's war with the continued purchase of Russian oil, purchases that directly fund Russia's war?
I'll respond that in a second, but I cannot but start by saying how important and moving it is for us Slovaks when we hear so many speaking with that level of recognition regarding Slovak support and solidarity with Ukraine. It means a lot. We've heard that from President Zelensky in his moving address this morning. We've heard it from President von der Leyen. We've heard it from Dmytro. It is important because I want to remind the audience that Slovakia ranks 8th globally measured to GDP when it comes to the assistance and actually assistance to Ukraine. So I want to thank you for that feedback. Can I comment on what my friend said?
Yes, please.
Because he not only is a good neighbor, but he's my friend. And I thank you, Alexander, for joining me for this debate. I agree entirely with you when you say that it cannot, when it comes to Ukraine's future in the European Union and granting candidate status, it cannot end with symbolism. I agree with you. Nevertheless, this symbolism at this moment, through granting candidate status, matters a lot, and we should not further delay the decision on it, because President Zelensky said it this morning. Our moral hinges on your moral, and I think this is exactly what Ukrainian nation needs, what the fighters for the very existence of their nation needs, a clear commitment and evidence that we count with them one day becoming member of European Union. But you cannot do that without the first symbolic step, if you want, and that's granting the candidate status. I agree with you entirely with Ursula von der Leyen. It's not about wild card giving them. It's not about fast tracking. It's not about shortcuts. But this is the moment to agree on candidate status for Ukraine. Just in the second question, how Slovakia reconciles what the fact that we keep on receiving Russian oil with the very clear support that Slovakia has been providing to Ukraine. I mean, we've agreed to the 6th package. As a matter of fact, at the end of this year, I think it will be 90% of oil deliveries from Russia that will cease to be brought to Europe. And it is reality for Slovakia and to other countries in Central Europe that we needed more time as a transition to the moment where we completely decouple from that. And I'm very glad.
You feel confident you'll be able to make up the shortfall in that in a year?
Yes, we must. Because to make it clear from the Slovak position, from the first moment on when basically oil embargo was put on the table, we agreed politically to it. You have never heard anybody from Slovakia saying that we are opposing oil embargo. No, not at all. But then we've been facing reality and we were told that we need some transition time. A solution was found, and I can announce now that after the package was agreed by the European Council on Monday, I think, half or 1 hour ago, there was an agreement in Coreper. So the news that you've heard yesterday that the package allegedly was reopened, now in Coreper we have an agreement on legal text, and that is a very good news. So long story short, I mean, we agreed politically we need this transition. We will stick to what we have agreed, and we will use the transition period for decoupling and for decreasing, for departing from that dependency of on Russian oil deliveries. No doubt about that.
Good.
If I may just come in a second.
Quickly, yes. I do want to go back to our friend in Ukraine.
I fully agree, but on the first point, on the enlargement, but it has become a blunt instrument. It's our most important instrument in geopolitical terms, but we should not create, we have to be watchful what kind of signals we're sending to other countries, other regions. And again, the Western Balkans has been waiting for 19 years. We have the Republika Srpska, we have other places there. We have to be watchful, and the only thing I'm saying is, let's get our act together. Open accession negotiations, I believe we agree on that, Ivan, with North Macedonia and Albania. Give visa liberalization to Kosovo. Think about candidate status for Bosnia, if you think about Moldova and Ukraine. So we have a geopolitical responsibility for our neighborhood, and it's not limited to one country. We have our neighbor, and we have to think probably twice again about North Africa, but this is a difference, not about membership, but there is a geopolitical responsibility we have, and we have to face up to this challenge.
Justin, you've opened. Sorry to take the floor again.
Open the door. But I'm going to close it soon.
No.
Go ahead, quickly.
We like each other.
Yeah.
That's the demonstration of it. But you've opened the Pandora's box where I have to respond to what my friend is saying. By granting candidate status to Ukraine, which is so urgent, we are not doing it at the expense of progress by the Western Balkans. And my dear friend, because you do support Albania and North Macedonia, the problem is not in Ukraine. We've been delaying this for months and months and months, and as we speak at this moment, in spite of the fact that the Commission said it's long overdue, the beginning with them of negotiations, we are blocking it as a member state. So I don't think we should remind us in context of Ukrainians' ambitions of our commitment to integration of the Western Balkans. It's not a zero-sum game. Not at all. We are not neglecting folks and guys in the Western Balkans. But now the question is, what else should boost the morale of Ukrainians when they are fighting for their existence, for our values, if not this bold commitment of us giving them a clear perspective? And I'm closing the Pandora's box.
Okay, well, wait, yes. Good. Mr. Senek, I want to turn to you because the thing I worry about is there's something emblematic here about someone who is in Ukraine on the front line watching people somewhere else argue about Ukraine and not being able to weigh in. So I'm very keen for you to put your oar in on this. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Firstly, let me echo what Secretary Gallagher said in his remarks, that peace is inconceivable without solidarity. And when we speak about European solidarity, we expect that the solidarity will be tangible, including the prospects for EU membership for Ukraine. Ukrainians sacrifice their lives for a better European future of their children. thousands of lives, just to make sure that their children have a better European future as an equal member of the European Union and the European family. Speaking of and drawing parallel with the Balkans, I think that granting Ukraine a candidate status does not contradict the enlargement process of the Western Balkans. First, because all countries will be equal in this process, and we are not asking for any separate doors to EU membership. Second, because in the history of the EU, the timing of an application has not always determined the way for enlargement for the country. Although Finland applied for membership later than Cyprus, it was in the enlargement wave along with Austria and Sweden. At the same time, Cyprus was included in the next wave of enlargement with Baltic states and others. So I think that, again, one does not contradict another, but that would be a clear message, a clear prospect, a clear signal for Ukrainians. And according to the recent poll, 91% of Ukrainians support the European integration, whereby the support among the European Union members of Ukraine is also quite high. Recent polls show 66% of EU citizens agree that Ukraine should be in the EU. So I think that now it's a time for politicians to follow the people's will.
All right. I'd like to turn things over to our audience. I want to remind everyone that you are, it's possible to ask questions using your GLOBSEC app. I will get them. And I want also everyone to follow a certain protocol here, which is please stand, please identify yourself, and most importantly, please ask a question. We are here to hear what these gentlemen have to say, and so let's give them a chance to say it. I also, just on a separate note, I want to encourage, in particular, female members of the audience to ask questions, because we are a manel up here, and so please, ladies in the audience, please make sure to raise your hand and have your voice heard as well. Do we have a first question? Who wants to jump in on this? All right, well, in the absence of one from the audience, I'll take one from an anonymous questioner who wants to hear a bit about the issue of the EU and Turkey, and I'm assuming that the underlying question here has to do with the NATO joining NATO, the process of Finland and Sweden joining NATO, and the way that Turkey seems to be holding that up. Anyone want to jump in and share their thoughts on that particular thorny topic? Mr. Korčok.
No, I think when it comes to NATO, it has to be Austria.
I would answer willingly on your behalf, but I believe this time.
With Switzerland, you're the only ones already, or still hesitating somehow. But with all due respect, no. I mean, we've heard for the first time 2 weeks ago in Berlin, when we were joined by our colleagues, foreign ministers of Sweden and Finland, a clear intention of these two countries. Then they've made steps on a parliamentarian level that they want to be members of NATO. I will not basically circumvent the question, but just pause for a second. Thank you, Mr. Putin. Thank you, Mr. Putin. Unthinkable is happening. Sweden, 200 years of non-allied, basically, defense. Finland, 2. And then within 3 months, the European landscape and political map, if you want, is dramatically changing. Second, yes, there is an issue. And we need unanimity within NATO, and our Turkish colleagues have made it very clear. And unless we have a clear commitment by Swedish and Finnish future members, I dare say, to how they respond to Turkish concerns regarding PKK and terrorism, everybody knows about that. There will not be their consent and their agreement. But I spoke yesterday or day before yesterday with my friend Mevlut Çavuşoğlu. I asked him about that state. So negotiations are underway. More progress needs to be done. And I remain confident. I can share with you what I encourage him, Mevlut, but also Ann Linde and Pekka, our Finnish colleague, to really negotiate it bona fide with good intentions and get a deal done before Madrid summit, which is at the end of June. And then NATO will be stronger with
Yeah. Where do you put the odds? The odds of that happening before Madrid? How would you rate them?
I mean, he understood the message, because I think that would be ideal outcome of it. I don't want to speculate on it. I don't want to go intentionally. I don't want to go too far for that, because I'm interested in a good result, and I don't think it's important to go into more details than I have shared with you. But I'm confident.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So thank you.
I want to stick with you, because you've proven wonderfully willing to take on some hard questions. So this is what we call a pie eating contest in America, where the reward is more pie. And so I want to talk about refugees, because Slovakia has taken on about 500,000 refugees. I think a huge number. Far more than many larger, wealthier countries. This is true of not just Slovakia, Poland as well, Hungary as well, a lot of the countries in the region. I wonder whether you think it's time for some of the larger countries in the western part of Europe to start considering whether they might take on some of the resettlement of these refugees, and whether that's something that comes up in conversation, because I know that it's not just a huge cost. There's a sort of people's patience can wear thin, and then there's a larger problem of a potential political backlash in some of these countries. So would one way to address or preempt some of those negative outcomes be for some of the burden of these refugees, as Mr. Gallagher talked about, for some of that burden to also be shared?
I don't want to fall in that trap, into what you want to drag me into, of course, because no, I mean, I entirely understand what you mean by that, and I don't think this is the moment, at least in a situation as we speak, even with 500,000 who crossed the border from Ukraine to Slovakia. Just 1/7 of them has stayed in Slovakia, which is a huge number. Of course, but I don't think that at this moment we have to now appeal to the Western countries and reopen the discussion, take them from us. Instead, I want to thank Slovak citizens, which have proven that that they have hearts and minds open, and we've opened schools, we've opened our houses.
It's remarkable.
And I'm proud of my nation, which once again has shown this solidarity. Nevertheless, and you're right, it's very costly undertaking, if I may say so. But if I dare say, it's not a burden. It's not a burden. It has not become a political issue, which up until now would be instrumentalized to that level that we would say, okay, it's enough. But I fairly have to recognize as well, should the war continue, should we face another wave of those seeking refuge in Slovakia, then we will have a problem. But two, I think it is important to say that there are many Western European countries who have taken Ukrainians, including Austria, Alexander can say, including Germany, including many countries where Ukrainians seeking refuge have their relatives and so on. So up until now, I think we can be proud of our approach to that challenge. For the audience, in Slovakia, on an annual basis, on annual level, we've had like 15, 30 asylums that we have granted.
The average, generally,
average, and like 160 asylum seekers, 161, 60. And then overnight you have 5,000 coming per day, and of course they're not seeking asylum, but just to demonstrate the dimension of that scale and of that challenge.
It's remarkable. Yeah. It's remarkable. Alex, you wanted to...
I have to say, and just to add, I mean, yes, for instance, this year alone, we have 21,000 asylum seekers already in Austria. We have always in our history been at the crossroads of Europe. and over 300,000 Ukrainians, displaced people, have entered the territory. Nearly 80,000 are staying in Austria, and there's a huge wave of solidarity, of compassion for them, and I'm very proud of it. But we have to keep in mind that, for instance, Austria was the first country to establish an air bridge from Moldova, because the country carrying the biggest burden per capita as far as the refugees or the displaced people are concerned is Moldova.
Right.
And we were the first country to establish an air bridge. We said we're going to fly in 2,000 displaced Ukrainian citizens to Austria. Up to now, only 500 have taken up this offer. Most Ukrainians, for the time being, we shouldn't forget, they're women with small children often, the men, or the brothers or fathers or sons are still in Ukraine fighting, and many of them don't want to go too far away from Ukraine, and many are already returning. We have nearly the flow going back to Western Ukraine is nearly as high as those leaving.
Which tells you a lot about the way the war is going, by the way.
So this is it, absolutely.
Right.
But it is an interesting fact that actually, if you offer them to fly a couple of 100 kilometers further to the west, many are hesitant for the time being because they expect to be able to return. And I believe this is something which is a very strong sign of them believing in the fate of their own country.
It's a great point. We had a question, the gentleman here in the middle row, if we could get him a microphone, please. Please make sure to stand up, tell us who you are, and ask a question of our panelist.
Yes, good afternoon. Konstantin Eget, freelance journalist from Vilnius, working mostly for Deutsche Welle. I have actually two questions, one to Herr Schallenberg and another one to Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine.
Keep them brief, please.
Yes and no. Don't worry, I work for the radio and television. So, Herr Schallenberg, your country, unfortunately, has a reputation for being weak on Russia, with Ms. Kneissl dancing with Putin, OMV, Raiffeisenbank, spy scandals. Was 24th of February a decisive moment when you kind of break with the past as a country, and what's being done about it? And to the Deputy Foreign Minister, we already heard about an Italian peace plan, so the P word was already out less than 4 months after the second invasion started. Let me be quite sort of provocative. Are you afraid that there are going to be more peace plans in the coming months? I hope you understand what I mean.
Thank you for this question, because I'm happy to be able to rectify some things.
The first one.
The first one. I said repeatedly publicly that I would never run the risk to dance with Vladimir Putin, not in the past and not in the future. And no, it wasn't the 24th of February. This is the line of this government. I'm the first Foreign Minister of Austria since we regained independence after the Second World War to have declared a Russian diplomat persona non grata, well before the attack on Ukraine. And I said repeatedly that we have to be aware, and actually this is common EU approach. What were the terms on Russia, which we adopted 2 years ago? It was engage, constrain, push back. And we have to acknowledge that we are a minority. The countries standing up for pluralism, for democracy, for human rights. We are on this planet a minority. And Austria has never been neutral as far as values are concerned or human rights are concerned. We know exactly where we stand. And yes, we, as other countries, Slovakia, Germany, Hungary, many others, use the opportunity to invest, to be present. Many companies are present and have been present in Ukraine, in Belarus, and in Russia. And it has been, a risk from beginning on, and now they're all, paying a price to a certain degree. And there will be an enormous economic shift. But the line of the Austrian government is extremely clear, and you can be for a lengthy time in the council, regardless of the 24th of February, and Ivan knows that, and all my colleagues know that, without ever finding out that Austria has a status of military neutrality.
Right. Mr. Senek, would you like to address this question about the Italian peace plan and potential other peace plans?
If I may, I would rather speak about, broader context of security guarantees for Ukraine. This is what we work with our partners now, because definitely, as we understand that the UNSC, the United Nations Security Council, was not able to secure peace and sovereignty of Ukraine. Therefore, definitely we need a stronger security guarantees that would definitely work in case of any aggression against Ukraine. So for the time being, there are different ideas, and we work with our partners, with first and foremost, with the European Union, with United States and Canada on making sure that this tragedy and this war will never happen again.
Very diplomatic.
We've been talking a lot about Russia, but I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative to ask a slightly different question about a different country that looms very large in all of this, and that is China. I'm curious, the conventional view, I'll tell you, the conventional view in the States, at least in the Washington to New York corridor part of the States, is that China has essentially lost Europe. It's lost particularly Eastern and Central Europe after having made serious inroads for many, many years with economic ties. I would love to hear each of you talk a little bit, very briefly, about your country's current relations with China. What's going on? Is that perception correct?
I believe you're fully correct. And what we are experiencing is, you could call it the geopolitical ice bucket we just received, actually. And yes, it came from Russia, but there is a lot of hard thinking, I believe, in boardrooms too, about what will be in the future relationship with China. And we are facing a situation politically or geopolitically which is difficult, because we are looking at the regionalization of globalization. Many things are breaking down. We just experienced what happens when Shanghai closes the ports, and the whole economy is actually restructuring. And I believe this will have a huge impact on the way we interact with China in the future. I have been recently to India and Pakistan, and there's one point we shouldn't forget sometimes in our debates. We have an extremely Eurocentric way of looking at this confrontation, and we have to broaden our thinking. The narrative in South Asia, the narrative in Africa is a completely different one. We are winning the information war here. We have won it in Europe, but we have not won it in Africa and in Asia.
Is it winnable there?
I believe it's a challenge, because we still have, the ongoing narrative is there. They're facing enormous problems and challenges. Look at Egypt, look at Lebanon, Libya and other countries. We have wheat missing, you have fallout of oil seeds and others, and increasing energy prices. And the narrative there is, this is all because of the Western sanctions. So we have to work harder to convince them and to get our narrative across, because we might have won it here, but it is winnable. It has to be won, because at the end of the day we know that the phase we are entering, there's no name yet for it, but we know already now it's going to be more confrontational. There will be no return to status quo ante in the next years. You cannot believe that by the end of the year or next year, in 2 years, we return to the way the world has been beforehand. No, this is the watershed moment. And it will be a more confrontational phase. It is going to be tougher, colder, and rougher. And I said the 30 years of holidays from history are over for us. And we had this peace dividend, which we used, and this peace dividend is over too. And I believe we have to think very hard how we approach multilateralism, how we approach international organizations, how we approach the cooperation which is necessary. No, we won't stop globalization. We won't close in our doors. We cannot, we shouldn't, but we have to think twice. The easy times are over.
Interesting. You mentioned the food crisis, and there's actually a question from Heinrich Kreft, who asks, are we thinking enough about the looming food crisis? This could lead to hunger uprisings in Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, a new wave of refugees potentially for Europe. I am wondering what is the EU's approach at the moment to mitigating this problem? I know that there have been discussions that was the next big thing to tackle after the oil. Where do things stand?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I mean, this is an enormous challenge, and that's what I referred to when I said we don't only have a challenge in our immediate neighborhood, but the question is whether we are capable of exporting our model of life and our security, Western Balkans and Eastern Europe, but we have to be very watchful for what is happening in the Middle East and Northern Africa. And the situation we are facing there, or the countries are facing, is very dire. And we have to be aware that probably, and I just had today a lengthy discussion in Vienna with members of the government, or Austrian government on this. We have to be aware that we need a lot of humanitarian aid in the future. We will need a lot of development aid. We are facing situations where we might see in a couple of months a huge migration flow moving towards Europe.
Can I ask on a very practical level, what is preventing the wheat from Ukraine from going, over land elsewhere? I understand the naval blockade, and I understand there's an issue with railway gauges and things like that, but this seems like a soluble problem. What am I missing?
Well, it's starting. We are using, and one of the ways is obviously the Danube, and we are providing what we can. And at first, there were a couple of trucks arriving. Now we have installed the system, but it's by far not enough. We're talking about millions and millions of tons of wheat and other things. And Black Sea is difficult, let's put it that way, even with the ports of Varna and others, but my colleague from Kiev will know that to answer that better. We are doing what we can from Austrian side to help. We need these solidarity corridors, as we call it. We need to get this. Is good for Ukraine, this is good for the world.
Sure.
But it takes time, and we have to acknowledge that what comes out will be more costly because the transport is more costly.
Because of the prices, right?
Absolutely.
It's all a cascading mess. We had a question over here. The gentleman wearing glasses in this row here. Yes, can you give him the mic? Please tell us who you are and let us know what you'd want to ask.
Hello, I'm Nico Lange from Germany. Minister Korčok was kind of joking this away earlier, but what Minister Schallenberg just said provoked me in asking this question again. You said rough times are ahead, things have certainly changed, will change in the future. Why did Austria then not reconsider NATO membership as other European Union members did who are joining NATO now?
Question. Well, I mean, each country has a different history, each country has a different development, each country has a different geographical situation. And we are following the debate in Finland and Sweden with great interest. But for the time being, we still have in Austria an enormous support for neutrality. 70 to 80% of the Austrian population are in favor of neutrality. The last politician who started a debate on neutrality was Wolfgang Schüssel, and it didn't fare well for him. What we need in Austria is a debate, because the problem is many people believe that neutrality equals security, and that's wrong. And and you said it beforehand, without wanting to be cynical, we have to be nearly thankful to Vladimir Putin, because in this ice bucket we received, he failed for the time being in getting his strategic goals. NATO is more relevant in the public eye, the West is more united than ever, and many countries are increasing the budget for the military services. So are we, and I believe that's the right approach, because if you're neutral at the end of the day, you have to invest considerable sum in your own security. And yes, we are all in favor for partnership for peace, but there's no willingness in the Austrian public to go the way of Finland and Sweden, and there is a big difference in the geographical and historical experiences.
Can I add something? Nico Lange's question is okay, but has to be fine-tuned in a way. It's for you to ask, but look, we have to respect here. I fully understand what Alexander is saying. We understand if a sovereign country says, I want to remain neutral, military neutral, it's your choice. And what I want to say by that, we have to remember, everybody knows it in this room, but for the purpose of public communication, we have to say it was not NATO that was pushed Sweden and Finland into its ranks. As a matter of fact, I negotiated together with Ambassador Kaczer here our accession to NATO. NATO has never pushed us. It costed us so much to convince NATO members to join. And I'm underscoring that because we'll be hearing at the moment when they become members, it's aggressive NATO expansion again. So that's not the case. It's the sovereign countries, both Sweden and Finland at this moment, who have taken their sovereign choice to become members of this historically most successful alliance. So I think it is important to respect their choice, but I think at the same time, it's important to respect the choice of Austria in this moment.
And as I said beforehand, you can be sitting in the European Council and you won't notice that we are actually military neutral because we're not politically. And when we used the European Peace Facility, Josep Borrell called me, it was a Sunday, I believe 1 week after the attack, and he asked me, do you have a problem with it? And I said, no, I will use constructive abstention. I won't prevent the others to move on. Then he asked me, oh great, can you call the 4 others, which is Ireland, Malta, and I said yes. And then he said, can you call Berlin too? And I said, no, that's your job. But here again, we have crossed many red lines, so to say, in Brussels. And Austria has declared, before we joined the European Union, that we will be in full solidarity with the common foreign and security policy. And this now is crunch time. And we are in full solidarity with the European foreign policy on this area.
Mr. Senek, we have just about 2 minutes left, and I would very much like to give you the last word. Please, whatever it is you'd like to weigh in, and I'd like to hear from you before we close out.
Sorry about not intervening timely because of the lack of the internet. I wanted just to add on the food security issue. It is a big problem, and actually now because of the Russian actions, we have 22 million tons of grain blocked in our seaports. We do work with our partners, neighbors, engaging international organizations to unblock and make sure that that nations in Africa who suffer already from this shortage of food will receive corn, grain, wheat, you name it. There is another thing, what is happening with Ukrainian grain, which is stolen by Russians now, is reminding me of the energy blackmail. But now the food is used to blackmail the entire world. So that was my message. And this is critical for Ukraine and for our partners to unblock those exports of the Ukrainian grain, including, what we do now using Danube and other routes, including the land ones as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for taking our questions. This was an interesting discussion. I learned a lot. Thank you all very much. Now we're going to go straight into our next session, which is led by Kevin Barron, and it begins with a short video.